could end this Ukrainian-Russia war in 24 hours.
Yeah.
How?
How do you feel when you heard those promises of Donald Trump?
I think, of course, it's not feasible because it assumes that Ukraine agrees with it, Russia agrees with it, the U.S. agrees with it, and other allies all agree.
Ми повинні витримати тиск зараз, будь-який тиск.
Ракеты атакуют цели со скоростью 10 махов.
Are we on the brink of nuclear war, or is just another tactics?
The Russians have thousands of nuclear warheads. They don't care how many innocent people are killed, including their own.
Hello, I'm Jenny Klochko, and you're watching my podcast, the platform for news, stories away from your daily newsfeed. Today we discuss something you probably seen in newsfeed because we talk what to expect for Ukraine from the new president in the United States, Donald Trump, and is it even possible to finish the war in 48 hours like he promised? And I have a very special guest today, one of my favorites, and I'm sure yours as well. It's American retired General Ben Hodges. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for the
you.
privilege.
Thank you for such early hour, and I hope our viewers won't be disappointed. I'm sure they won't. So, what to expect for Ukraine? America is having a new president. He started already appointing people. So I don't know how Europe, they probably as well, they don't know what to expect. But Ukraine is terrified because it's like minefield. What you expect is going to be supportive. Is the ammunition coming? Is it going to be some peace negotiations? What's your take on this?
Well, you're correct that we don't know how the new president will actually govern when it comes to Ukraine. Certainly based on things he has said in the past, and the people around him, like Vice President-elect J.D. Vance or Elon Musk, or even the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., it doesn't give me a lot of hope for Ukraine, for American support for Ukraine. But there's three things that I think keep me from becoming too depressed about it. Number one, most of the senior Republican leadership in the Congress, in the Senate, and in the House of Representatives are very pro-Ukraine as well as pro-NATO and pro-transatlantic. So I think the Congress will prevent the administration from completely turning its back. So that gives me some optimism. Secondly, I'm seeing an increased recognition by European leaders that in anticipation of a Trump administration, that they have got to be prepared to take up the slack if the United States does not continue to provide what it is doing, that Europe will have to fill that gap because Europeans know what the consequences will be if Ukraine fails. And so while I can't guarantee they're going to do it, just yesterday, there was a joint declaration by the 6 foreign ministers of Poland, Germany, France, UK, and Italy, and one other country, I think Spain, that rededicated themselves to support for Ukraine, made it very clear support for Ukraine was important. And it was almost like their message actually was targeting President Trump, President-elect Trump, to say, hey, look, we are going to do our part, but don't turn your back on Ukraine and don't turn your back on Europe. So that gives me some optimism, assuming that they follow through, and especially after the German elections in February, I think we'll see a much more robust, forward-leaning German government with Friedrich Merz as the Bundeskanzler. And then the third thing, of course, President Biden, while I have been a critic of his reluctance to provide and all the things that Ukraine needed, I think this recent decision to lift at least some restriction on the use of ATACMS, which is still not entirely clear, but that gives a glimmer that we could do, and he might do more here in the last couple of months.
Interesting with this permission. because when we had this ongoing discussion, and always politicians underline that you will find out about this permission when we already attacked. What happened? They announced publicly, and on that day at night, Ukraine hit the base in Bryansk. Isn't it a bit strange? Because usually with the ammunition, with delivery, it's happened already. As we know, it's already on the battlefield, and only then the politicians make it this information public. But here is a bit strange, don't you think?
Yeah, of course, you're exactly right. That's how it should have happened. You should not be advertising or telegraphing that you are going to do a certain thing, but let exactly as President Zelensky said, let the missiles speak for themselves. But you know, people have different reasons for leaking information. Either they're trying to influence it one way or the other. But Washington, D.C., like most capitals, is famous for these kinds of leaks. So it's unfortunate that it got out, and so there was confusion about where did it apply? Does this apply to UK Storm Shadow and French Scalp, for example? Um, so the messaging was a mess, but I think this is a reflection of the administration is they still are struggling with being able to say what the objective is, and so you end up with weak or confusing policies and confusing messaging.
Do you think, because just yesterday as we speak was announced that Putin is updating his nuclear doctrine and his usual approach, terrifying everyone, are we on the brink of nuclear war? Or is just another tactics?
I think this is the usual Kremlin scaremongering. I think, of course, I can't guarantee it. The Russians have thousands of nuclear warheads. They don't care how many innocent people are killed, including their own. But I just think it is so unlikely that they would actually use a nuclear weapon because there's no benefit for Russia to use a nuclear weapon. I mean, the Ukrainians have made it clear that that's not going to change what they do. It won't change anything on the battlefield to help the Russians. They don't have the capability to exploit a nuclear weapon employment the way that they did in the Cold War days when they were the Soviet Union. The Chinese and India have both said do not use nuclear weapons because they don't want disruption of access to cheap Russian oil and gas. So I think it's just very unlikely that they would do it. But they see that the administration and some others in other countries, particularly Germany, are easily deterred just by the threat of, oh my God, they might use a nuclear weapon. And so I think for Russia, that's what this is about. And by the way, doctrine does not make it the law. Like therefore, they have no choice; they have to use it. I mean, this we all have doctrines, but by describing we've changed our doctrine. Okay, that's just to remind people that they have nuclear weapons.
What did you mean they don't have capabilities like Soviet Union had? So do you mean they actually, don't have all the parts to activate it and make it happen?
So they do have the ability to launch the weapon, but as you and most of your listeners know, you have different types of nuclear weapons. Not only different delivery means, the so-called triad that comes from intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarines, and aircraft, but also you have strategic nuclear weapons, which would be used against cities in the United States, for example. Um, but they also have tactical nuclear weapons, which are a much lower yield, a much uh, smaller detonation. I guess that's the simplest way to say it. And the purpose for creating tactical nuclear weapons was to blow a hole in NATO defenses, like somewhere on the inter-German border between East Germany and West Germany. So they would use a tactical nuclear weapon that would create a breach in the defenses. And then they had forces, regiments of soldiers that were properly equipped and trained and in vehicles that could operate in a contaminated environment, a radioactive contaminated environment. And they would go into the area that had just been hit by the nuclear weapon. Secure the opening, and then more forces would come rushing through to continue on to their objective, like Frankfurt or whatever their objective was. That's what doesn't exist anymore. They don't have the troops with the radioactive or the equipment and training that would enable them to operate in that environment. So there's no exploitation capability. That's why I say that therefore there's no tactical benefit to use it on the battlefield. So they would only get all the downsides, no benefit.
Interesting. Is it possible to finish Russian war in Ukraine in 48 hours? How do you feel when you heard those promises of Donald Trump?
Well, look, I think of course it's not feasible because it assumes that Ukraine agrees with it, Russia agrees with it, the US agrees with it, and other allies all agree. Okay, that's not going to happen. I think the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian people know that Russia has. I have zero confidence that Russia would ever live up to any agreement. Nobody in Eastern Europe believes that the Kremlin would live up to any agreement. And so the only way you're going to get nations to agree to some sort of negotiated settlement involving Russia was if, number one, Ukraine believes it was the best thing, and that you had some sort of force in place that would ensure that Russia lived up to the agreement. I have a hard time believing that Russia would actually agree to some sort of peacekeeping force that would have NATO soldiers inside Ukraine. I think that the president-elect probably imagines, and I listened to him again last night, a recording of his earlier statement where he said, yeah, this would be easy. I could do it in 24 hours. I imagine what he thinks is that he tells Vladimir Putin, look, you stop what you're doing right now. I'll make sure Ukraine never gets into NATO. I will cut off all aid to Ukraine, but you need to stop right now. If you don't, then I will give Ukraine everything they want and with no restrictions. Now that's I don't know that, but I tried to imagine what would such a bargain look like. Right now, Vladimir Putin is not interested, I think, in doing that. I mean, it's been interesting to see how Putin has reacted to the election of Trump. He hasn't reached out to him much. There's been no, as far as we could tell. I think that that Putin is not interested in anything that doesn't look like he won. I mean, he has to win. So whatever the negotiated outcome is, it has to be that Russia gets all of the Donbass, all the oblasts that he has claimed, and guarantee that Ukraine is never allowed in NATO. And those are that's the kind of settlement that Putin will demand. Well, that's a non-starter for Ukraine. That's a non-starter for Poland, Finland, Baltic countries, Romania, and it should be a non-starter for the United States. So I'm sorry for the long answer, but we're at that point where I think Russia cannot keep doing what they're doing. I mean, their economy, their manpower situation is also dire. Ukrainian forces certainly are suffering casualties. Ukrainian people are suffering from these constant attacks, but still, after 11 years, Russia only controls 20% of Ukraine. And I just don't see the prospect for Russia, for that changing unless the West totally quits. And I don't see that happening.
I want to come back to something we discussed in our previous interview when we discussed no American troops on the ground. But just recently, the two things happened. I don't know, have you had a chance to read this book, Bob Woodward? But in chapter 20, he discusses exactly this moment, and it's like it gives you insight. It's very short chapter, but it gives you insight, like you present while these negotiations with Biden and his advisors happening, and some of these his advisors actually wanted him to have this option, because when diplomatic negotiations, this kind of option should be there. But he decided otherwise because another, not to what's the word? Elevate the level, to hit up the situation. So, and just recently, Boris Johnson, who has no power and he is free to speak anything, so he mentioned that it's probably in some circumstances there will be British troops on the ground. President-elect Trump, he known for his fiery approach to things. Do you think this possibility might be coming at some point with foreign troops on Ukrainian ground?
I hope so. I mean, the West has a responsibility to Ukraine to guarantee Ukraine's security, going back to the Budapest Memorandum. Um, and we know from history that Russia cannot be trusted to live up to any agreement. They never have, unless there's some really hard forcing function that will make them do it. So ideally, Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, and then you have U.S., British, German, other troops that are there as part of exercises, just like we do in Poland and Romania and Baltic countries. So I would love to see that, because I think it would be an important contribution to stability and security in Europe. But that would require, I mean, that would be a challenge to get there, because the president would have to explain to the American people, have to get the support of the Congress, and I think that and of course they'd have to be invited there by Ukraine. I'm not talking about a lot, but I could imagine, air and missile defense, different other capabilities, logistics that would help as part of a rotational force. So I don't know that that's being seriously considered anywhere, but we talk about security guarantees. I don't imagine that there's a real security guarantee for Ukraine unless you have U.S. Troops actually on the ground there, or Ukraine is inside NATO.
Mobilization, another question we touched last time. And interesting, not a long time ago, I was on the training grounds in the UK where Ukrainian volunteers are those who joined just armed forces being trained. And last time you said the Ukrainian government have to provide those guarantees and conditions for people who join in the army to feel safe, that he will be trained, prepared, equipped, and their families will be taken care of if something happens. And I quote you while speaking to these volunteers who had, it was infantry, and they had only 5 weeks, and they were teachers, doctors, had nothing to do with military. I asked them, do you feel safe? Do you feel like you're ready to go and everything? Those people I spoke to, and it was actually the conversation of father and son. They used to work for railway, and they decided to join together army. They assured me that they do feel, and they were touched by British approach and how everything they needed they gave. So they were quite enthusiastic. And preparing for our interview, I had conversation with one of Ukraine's F-16 pilots. And he quoted me Jack Sullivan, I think, where he was saying that Ukraine doesn't have a problem with equipment, ammunition, or modern systems. All Ukraine need is to make tougher mobilization. And I wouldn't agree, because just last Sunday, I posted the interview on my podcast with the lady commander. She's doing artillery, and she's fighting in Donbass with howitzer, which was made in 1946. And other people from the front line, those who are using other type of weapons, they say, we see their positions, we just lack of ammunition, we just lack of all sorts of things. So why American, I know you are not responsible for their actions, but why this kind of thinking? The problem not with the munition, because it's clearly the problem there, but problem with mobilization.
Well, of course, I don't know, and I haven't heard those specific statements, but I have seen sometimes where there's a tendency to blame the Ukrainians for not, whether they're Ukrainians are not grateful enough, or they didn't do it the way we said to, or they're not being smart with how they use things, or whatever. And that's not only is that wrong, it's extremely unhelpful. I think Ukrainians have done a very good job using what they've gotten wherever they got it from. They've adapted it. Ukrainians know Russia better than any of us ever will. Ukrainians understand how the Russians fight better than any of us ever will. And so I've always felt that our job was to commit to helping Ukraine win and then give Ukraine what they need and get out of the way and allow the Ukrainians to fight in the way that is most effective, not try to, guide them into doing something the way we would do it necessarily. Um, and so you can, if it's not working, then you can blame the Ukrainian mobilization system or whatever. Now, for sure, we know from history that war is a test of will and it's a test of logistics. And this is clear that wherever Russia has made uh, progress, it was not because Ukraine did not have enough drones. It was because they did not have enough artillery ammunition. And so I think that uh, while we are still, I mean, just think of the combined economies of the EU, plus UK, plus Canada, plus the United States. Why are we not producing more ammunition? This is about political will. We have the capacity to do it, but you have to express political will with money by paying for increased production. And we haven't done it. And this is the fault of our administration, of the German government, of the British government, of other governments who have not seriously undertaken the mission to ramp up production of what's needed by Ukraine. And this is a reflection of the critical task of the government is to say, what's the objective? What are we trying to accomplish? And unfortunately, they have never said, our mission, our objective is that Ukraine defeats Russia. And we're going to do everything to help them do that. Not, we're with you for as long as it takes, which is a totally empty statement. We're going to do whatever it takes. And they haven't done that. And so that's why we are still not operating or producing at the level that's needed by Ukraine.
A couple of days ago, twice there was a cut off the cable in the Baltic Sea. And is there something to be alarmed about, or it's just more symbolic and hooligan message from, we suspect from whom, isn't it?
What's alarming to me is that we're surprised that the Russians are doing this. I mean, that's the alarming part, that people are like, oh my God, they just cut the cable. Well, no kidding, they cut the cables. Russia is at war with us, even if we don't think it that way. I think the Russians are always somewhere on the spectrum of war, using the different tools and things and methods to constantly keep us on our back foot, to test the limits, to provoke, and when we don't push back, if we don't inflict pain on them, that only provokes them to do more. So I think at some point we're going to have to start being much more robust in our responses to things like cutting of cables. Don't be afraid to say, we know this was Russia. It was a Chinese ship with a Russian crew, perhaps, or working in conjunction with. These are not accidents. Even the German defense minister yesterday said that nobody in the world believes this was an accident. This was sabotage. So I think that we've got to reconfigure how we respond to these things. Cruise missiles flying through Romanian airspace and Polish airspace, and we don't do anything, nothing. Now, if it only happened once, you could say, okay, probably a malfunction, but it happens a lot. And so until we start shooting these things down and doing something, and of course Russia will complain. Of course Russia will blame us for stop listening to their nonsense. And uh, we we have to act with some decisiveness. Otherwise, the Russians are just going to continue doing what they're doing.
Putin talks a lot about the red lines. I don't know if you know, I found out recently the first time where actually the expression the red lines, it came out of Crimea 170 years ago between British and Russians. It's when the British actually infantry were standing there in their red coats and the red lines. Interesting enough, how symbolic it's for the war we're discussing. Those original, the first red lines, never been attacked or never been interrupted, or basically crossed by Russians. Maybe it's the destiny; they will never be never will be crossed. What do you think, taking your military and life experience, when you hear about another red lines from Putin?
Well, first of all, no one should ever say something is a red line, meaning um, can't be crossed unless you're prepared to enforce that. When you say it and then you don't enforce it, then in the future, when you say something is really important, it it doesn't have any credibility. And so um, all the times that the Kremlin has threatened that, if America does this, if Great Britain does this, if Germany does this, that will be, we may have to escalate. They haven't because they can't. And so that's why I think these things are not credible. But it works the other way as well. If we say something, this is unacceptable, and then we accept it, then we also are not credible. Or after, I mean, I'm just so tired of watching political leaders say after a missile kills innocent Ukrainians in Odessa, for example, or Kherson or Kharkiv, and then we'll say, this is terrible, this is war crime, and then we don't do anything. So to me, those are the same thing as not enforcing a red line. When you shake your fist at something's really terrible, but you don't do anything about it, those are totally empty words.
What does Ukraine need to do to win this war?
Um, well, of course, it's on different levels. The things that Ukraine can control for itself, I think it's trying to do. It's increasing its own production of long-range weapons that can strike Russian oil and gas infrastructure, that can strike Russian arsenals, that can strike um, Russian air and naval capabilities. And then even something as simple as what we saw yesterday, the Russian Navy officer that was responsible for coordinating strikes by Russian ships against Ukrainian cities, his car was blown up. Okay, so every single Russian officer that is anywhere in the chain of decisions that lead to the killing of innocent Ukrainian civilians, every one of those officers should know that Ukraine knows who they are and that they will never be safe. So that's one thing. That's something that Ukraine is doing and can be doing that within its own power of capabilities. The second thing, of course, we've talked to it several times now, but it's still important, is the government earning the confidence of the population so that young women and men are willing to step forward to serve in the armed forces. And the government has to make sure that these people are going to be properly trained and equipped before they're sent to the conflict. That's that is a never-ending task, but it's obviously essential. Um, but I would also say in messaging that perhaps Ukraine's messaging could be um, fine-tuned a little bit to help explain to European countries and to the United States and Canada why this matters to Europe and the United States and Canada. I mean, we're past the point now where it's emotion or sympathy or something like that. That's that doesn't change. What will change is when most Americans begin to realize that high food prices and high energy prices are directly a result of Russian attack on Ukraine. That the millions of Ukrainian refugees who will continue to go into Europe, how that will affect European economies and the impact that has on the United States. So explaining the significance of why this matters. That to me, over the last several months, I had a chance to speak with a lot of Americans about this topic, why the war matters. And they would say, yeah, the Ukrainians are brave, but bad luck for them. What does that have to do with me in Missouri or North Carolina or Pennsylvania? And so when I would explain these things, how it does affect them, you could see that people are like, oh, wow, I never heard that. So I would continue to try and explain that. And then finally, I know that there are retired senior officers in Ukraine who, and probably some scientists who, in the Cold War, when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, that they had something to do with the Soviet nuclear program. It would be very helpful if they would speak openly and publicly about the actual capabilities. Why would Russia use a nuclear weapon or not? What would happen? So, I mean, people that are real technical experts that could explain why it is so unlikely that Russia would use a nuclear weapon. I think that would really be a contribution to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for today, and thank you for the work you do tirelessly. I know I caught you in between the continents, and good luck with everything. I hope your health, the energy level, and inspiration won't go any further. I mean, staying and strong and high as you usually are. Thank you very much. Yes, and I'm endlessly grateful to you.
Jenny, thanks again for the privilege. The women of Ukraine are so inspirational. I see your energy and other women that I have met that are just courageous and articulate and tireless. And I met your ambassador last week when I was in Washington, Oksana Markova. She is an incredible woman. Ukraine is so well represented there in Washington by your ambassador, and yeah, that's what gives me hope also.
Oh, thank you very much. And good luck with all your plans and all your dreams and with all the conversation you have. I hope people, I don't think they have a chance not to hear you because you resonate greatly with people. I can see it with the audience and viewers after our interview on my podcast. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you for watching. Today my guest was Ben Hodges. We discussed what to expect Ukraine from President-elect Trump, and are we on the brink of a nuclear war? Share your thoughts. You possibly don't agree or agree. Let's discuss it in the comments. And thank you very much for all your likes, subscriptions, comments. Oh, I love your comments. And I think I reply like 99% to all of them, unless I don't understand what you mean. And sometimes I just ask them. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time that you spent it with me and Ben Hodges. So have a great day.